Hello, everyone, and welcome to Osage University Partners webinar series. My name is Kirsten Loita, and I head University Relations here at OUP. Today, we are having a conversation on university accelerators and incubators. The goal of this webinar is to learn practices associated with each of the different accelerators and incubators we'll be highlighting, and how each of these programs bridges the gap from nascent university-affiliated startups towards spun-out entities that are commercializing products and services. To get started, I'd like to introduce each of our speakers. Satish Rao is the Associate Director of Physical Sciences Licensing at Columbia Technology Ventures and leads Columbia Technology Ventures Accelerator efforts, some of which we will discuss today. Welcome, Satish.
Thanks.
John Avery is the Director of the Advanced Technology Development Center at Georgia Tech. He just started there a month ago. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Reed Sturdivant is the General Partner at the Engine at MIT. Welcome, Reed.
Thank you.
And Caroline Winnett joins us from Berkeley's Skydeck, where she is Executive Director. Welcome, Caroline. Caroline, are you there?
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks. Just want to make sure. I want to make sure everyone's phone was working so our audience could hear them. For our audience, in just a moment, you'll notice a poll appearing on your screen. If you could please fill this out, we'd love to know how many people are attending this webinar today. So thank you very much. Just tell us how many people are in your location, and we'll get then started going with our webinar. So to begin, we're going to have each of our speakers give a brief introduction to their accelerators or incubators. John, could you start us off, please?
Yes, so again, my name is John Avery. I'm the Director for ATDC. ATDC is Georgia's technology incubator. It was founded in 1980 as an economic development program for the state of Georgia. So our mandate is to help support entrepreneurial growth and job growth in Georgia. We have 3 tiers in our program. Just to make it clear, we're not an accelerator, we're an incubator. I think we'll get into some of that discussion in the call today about the differences between them. But we have a program that runs continuously. Our startups can be involved with us for several years at a time. We have basically 3 levels of engagement. If you think about a pyramid, then the bottom is the widest part. It's what we call our educate level. So anyone in the state of Georgia can sign up to be part of our program and receive certain amounts of online training and classes and access to the other members who are in the program. And then above that is the accelerate level, which are companies that have a full-time employee and some kind of a development of a minimum viable product that has some possibility. And there's about 100, first of all, at the educate level, we have more than 600 people currently involved in that program. At the accelerate level, there are about 150 or so companies. That number changes pretty regularly. And then at the top, we have what we call our signature program, which is when there is a product that's in the market they're receiving revenue from. And in that stage, the program is tailored to provide them with additional talent, with venture capital connections and industry connections to help them grow and scale. When they reach 2 years of more than $1 million of annual recurring revenue, then they're graduated from the program to make room for new people that are coming in. And currently we are graduating about 5 or so companies a year from that program. I think I'll just stop there and we'll have the rest of the discussion in the call.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Caroline, do you want to give a description of Berkeley Skydeck?
Sure. Berkeley Skydeck is UC Berkeley's startup incubator and accelerator, so we do both. And our accelerator track, we host about 20 companies every 6 months. We give them $100,000 in funding from our private dedicated venture fund, the Berkeley Skydeck Fund. And as a UC Berkeley program, we give those startups access to the talent, the technology, labs, and resources that are part of UC Berkeley. We also incubate. We have a much larger number of those companies, about 80 to 100. So at any given time, we have about 100 companies in our program, and we have 2 floors of a building in downtown Berkeley right next to campus, plus space in San Francisco and space on campus. We work directly on mentorship. We have about 150 dedicated mentors. We call them Sky Advisors, plus a broader network of industry affiliates who have agreed to help our startups. And we're open to both UC Berkeley and all UC campus affiliates, so anybody affiliated with any of those campuses, plus the national labs. And we're also open to startups that are outside the US that would like to come and launch their startups here in Silicon Valley with the help of Skydeck. And our fund, the Berkeley Skydeck Fund, is how we fund the teams. It's a private venture capital fund that invests in all the startups here and owns that equity. But the fund shares half of the fund carry, that's the fund profits, with UC Berkeley. So that's a brief overview of Berkeley Skydeck.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Caroline. Reed, could you talk about the engine?
Sure, happy to. So a few years ago, President Raphael Reif of MIT started talking about and thinking about a gap for tough tech companies that are looking to commercialize scientific breakthroughs and engineering work. There was a relatively long process that led to the formation of the engine 18 months ago. And MIT historically, for 150 years, has had impact on the real world as part of the central mission, whether it's for education or research. So MIT decided to say it was part of their mission to put the engine, which is an independent for-profit firm, into motion. So MIT contributed $25 million to our first venture fund, has provided a generous line of credit to help us get operations up and running. And the engine is a combination of a venture capital firm and a set of platform services to support and accelerate the translation of tough tech into successful businesses that at scale could have a positive impact on the world. We have launched with a focus on the Boston area. We can invest in and support companies that come out of MIT, but also out of other institutions such as Harvard, Tufts, Northeastern, as well as companies that come out of industry. Along with capital, we are building a set of platform services ranging from facilities. We've got a first 26,000 square foot facility in Cambridge with workspace, biology lab, chemistry lab, machine shop. We're building in the planning phases for 200,000 square foot expansion around the corner from us. We've made 14 investments so far and are just in the process of figuring out how to become long-term self-sustaining.
Great. Thank you so much, Reed. Satish, moving on, last but not least, of course, Columbia Tech Ventures creating its own accelerators for Columbia.
Yep. So just to clarify, Columbia Technology Ventures, we are the technology transfer office of Columbia University. I lead what we call the physical sciences licensing team at Columbia. Our main client is the engineering school. So our team is tasked with commercializing IP coming from broadly anything that an engineering school will be involved in. In addition, our office operates and runs to some degree 7 technology lab to market accelerators, 3 of which, the most recent 3, are on the slide here. One called the Combine, which is focused on media and is part of a partnership with other New York City universities, and 2 more to be launching in 2019. One as part of the Cyber NYC initiative, also a city-funded initiative to create cybersecurity opportunities in the city. And a second called the Columbia IBM Blockchain Accelerator, which is focused on working with later stage and early stage teams as they try to build products on the blockchain. It's our first program that we're launching with a strategic that is an industry leader in the field. One reason why we're able to run these programs efficiently, and so many of them, is because we've formed a group within our office that we call the Lab to Market Accelerator team. And it's a team of 3 individuals that are able to share best practices across our different accelerators and support these accelerators and a lot of our operations. Therefore, each of these programs does not necessarily need as many FTEs as they would siloed, which we found to be an incredible resource for us to be able to pull together all these programs at the same time. Looking forward to chat more about it.
Great. Yeah, Satish, I can actually see you potentially writing a handbook for other tech transfer offices on this, honestly.
Right.
So thank you, everyone, for providing this background on your incubators and accelerators. I think it gives the audience a really good idea of kind of the variety of flavors and locations of these accelerators and incubators, and provides good context, obviously, for the rest of this webinar. The rest of the webinar is going to be structured as a panel discussion with question and answers. We do like to receive questions from our listeners, so if you'd like to submit a question during this webinar as our audience, including right now, you should see a Q&A box either on the top or the bottom of your Zoom screen, so please do submit your questions there. To start off their question and answer period, John, could you talk a little bit about what seems like maybe an easy question, but maybe is really more a complex question as you go into it. What is the difference between an incubator and an accelerator?
Sure. So the primary difference, at least from our perspective, is that the incubator is an ongoing program that has continuously available services, and startups can stay with us for several years at a time, where an accelerator is specifically a short-term program, normally between 3 and 6 months, sometimes even shorter, sometimes a little longer. But it's a really intense full-time program that has a different mandate. So the reason it's important to have both is that the accelerators provide an essential function to kickstart the startup in a very aggressive way to get the momentum and the connections and everything needed. But they have to land somewhere for their longer-term growth, and that's where the incubators come in. So in our case, the programs that we have available are available to any of the companies as needed that repeat over and over through the cycle. And but we have actually several accelerators related to our organization that serve the needs both at the early end and the late end of the process. So on the front end, when they're just getting started, there can be an accelerator to get to the minimum viable product. And on the back end, when you're trying to reach scale, there can be an accelerator that can really help there. And either before or middle or after those accelerators, the incubator we have here is available for them to continue their growth. So that's kind of a summary.
That's great. Actually, I was thinking about what you just said with what Caroline had talked about in the opening. So Caroline, with Skydeck, you're both an accelerator and an incubator. Just playing off of what John just said, can you talk about why it was decided then for Skydeck to have both this accelerator as well as incubator associated with this one program?
Sure. So number one, demand. The demand for space and support by UC Berkeley startups is quite large. So we found that there were requests for companies to join Skydeck at various stages, everything from idea stage to later stage. So we're accommodating that demand by our community by hosting both. And second of all, it allows us to have an intelligent funding strategy with our fund. So the fund invests directly in the accelerator track companies. So that's a specific program that's very intensive. And then the fund has the option to join investment rounds that are raised by the incubator track, but we're not formally accelerating them. It's a different program, but much of what we do for both tracks brings all of the resources together and multiplies that effort. So we found it, once we figured out how to manage those two programs simultaneously, we found it to be a very good way for us to set up our program.
Perfect. That actually leads me really well into my next question about how some of your programs came into being. And Reed, you touched upon this a little bit when, during your opening, but was there a movement at the university? I know in your case, obviously the president of MIT was involved in this, or an individual or a dedicated group of enthusiasts who really drove the process. And maybe Reed and Satish, you could both comment on this, how the program actually came about. So I know a lot of our universities are looking at these and how it actually came to the point of fruition of your program coming off the ground.
Yeah, I can start with that. This is Reed. So as I mentioned, the initiative was driven at MIT's from the very top down with President Raphael Reif. They did create, before my time, did create a set of working groups that cut across key issues, conflict of interest, relationship with academia, the faculty. So they had I would guess about 100 people involved for more than a year in this series of working groups to create recommendations for the program. It's, as you can imagine, it's an unusual step for a nonprofit institution to lean their reputation and brand behind a for-profit. So there was a bunch of groundwork that was laid before the engine was launched. Some key decisions that were made along the way were that this was to support companies and technologies regardless of whether they came out of MIT itself, and that it would be structured in a way that could have a long-term self-sustainable business model. So it's really two parts. One is the traditional venture capital structure, and the other part for our facilities and the services we offer. We charge rent for occupants of the building, and eventually we'll be opening up these services to more than just the companies we invest in. So the idea is that we're trying to take friction out of the early days for these companies that are often based on physical sciences and need lab space and more specialized facilities.
Great. And Satish, the same question about who are the drivers and people who really created the momentum for getting your accelerators off the ground?
Yeah, I'll start with just directly speaking to the sources, and then there is a higher level strategy as to why we do want to do these programs. So first of all of our accelerators are certainly funded by some type of external funding. So whether it's a federal grant, a foundation grant. In the case of the three that are on the slide here, the Combine, the Media Accelerator, and the Cyber Accelerator are both funded by RFPs released by New York City's Economic Development Corporation, the EDC. And so the EDC's function, other cities in the country have similar offices, and their job is to basically take city resources and funding and try and create essentially job opportunities. So how do you cultivate the technology ecosystem in New York and sort of create the sandbox where you can have companies and investors and startups form, and hopefully as you create innovation here in these verticals, you will then lead to creation of jobs and things like that. So when those RFPs came out, we certainly were interested in applying, and we were fortunate to win those grants to these programs. The IBM, the blockchain accelerator is similar in the sense that it was a pitch to the company to obtain funding for a research center, and this accelerator is one of the pillars of those centers. So again, funded by a third party. But the reason why the strategy behind it is our office, I think, is committed to I would say broadly two strokes, but of course there are many other reasons. I think one, we like other universities have found that this is a great way to get that research out of the lab and into the marketplace. It's a great way to motivate inventors to become founders. It's a great way to attract venture capital and corporation type business to the university. And so we see value. It's a great way to just validate the things that our tech transfer offices are traditionally supporting through patent licensing and marketing. And finally, being in New York, I think we find it to be strategic that by putting ourselves in these spaces, it sort of inserts Columbia and maintains sort of our presence in the sort of the fabric of the city in these verticals. And so we do want to be a leader in all things technology, such as in life sciences, but also in clean tech. And we want to do so in media, cyber, and blockchain. So we find these programs a great way to sort of elevate our presence in the city with those activities.
Perfect, thank you. Actually, along with what you just answered, Satish, we have a question from the audience. They would like to know specifically from each one of you who funded your buildings, labs, and facilities and space that you currently operate out of, as well as if you have a fund, who funded the fund. So could each one of you, and I know you've touched on this a little bit, but could each one of you specifically say who funded those two areas? So, and Satish, you already mentioned obviously the grant funding.
Right.
Okay, John.
ATDC, it's basically a state part of the state budget to cover our basic staff, and we do charge rent for the facilities. We have about 50 companies or so in the facility at Georgia Tech, and there's rent that there's paid, but it's a discounted rate. And that's also essentially offset by that funding as well. But there is the startups that come through this program are involved with a lot of venture capital, as you can imagine. And so the each of them in their quest or in their journeys are bringing money into this into themselves, which is sort of feeding the system. But as a program, the main staff and the facilities that we have here are covered by the state budget.
Great. Caroline?
So Skydeck was launched by campus leadership. It was the chancellor and the vice chancellor for research, Dean of Haas, Dean of Engineering. And they, just to quickly start with the origin story, because I think that's important. They all got together and wanted to do something that was not within one department or one school. And they partnered with the city, the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and the owners of the building that we lease space from. This group all got together. It was really driven by UC Berkeley, primarily with these partners. And for the first few years of our program, it was fully funded by UC Berkeley. And over the years, we've developed our own funding program so that now we're funded by outside partners. So that's how we keep the lights on here at Skydeck and pay the bills. Our fund, the Berkeley Skydeck Fund, is a venture capital fund like any VC fund, and it's all private capital. So it's LPs like Sequoia Capital, Mayfield, Sierra Ventures, et cetera, who are looking to get great access to the UC Berkeley ecosystem. So there's actually at this point really virtually no university funding for our program, and there isn't any for the private capital for the fund as well. But it took some time to get there.
That's good to know, actually, because it is something that takes effort. It's not something that it just easily rolls out.
Correct.
Carolyn put a lot of work into it. And Reed, was there anything that you wanted to add from your previous comments on that particular question?
Yeah, so there, MIT provided for the building and facilities that we're working on a 10-year line of credit that we will pay back. So they gave us access to capital at a low cost, so that got that up and running. And that the business model for our space is we will charge rent and lab fees and that sort of thing. On the venture fund side, MIT off of their balance sheet, and this is all public information, was an anchor limited partner with 25 million, and we wound up raising for the first fund a total of 205, primarily from families, just as any venture firm would. There is no, we're an independent organization, so we have 8 people on our board of directors. MIT controls 2 of those seats. So we make our own decisions, and the financial return to MIT itself is simply when we pay back the loan with interest, and then their $25 million investment, knock on wood, when our fund does well, as an investor in the fund, they would get returns from that.
Great, terrific. Thank you so much, everyone, for answering that. We have another question from the audience about the equity potentially that the university takes. I think when licensing out to the startup companies, does the university take an equity position in these startup companies that actually are enrolled in the Incubator and Accelerator programs? Reed, do you want to start out?
Sure. There's no direct equity for MIT in these companies. It's sort of pooled through the fund. If one of the startups does license IP through MIT's TLO or Harvard's OTD, then yeah, there's typically, as you all would expect, there's typically both an equity and a royalty participation.
Okay, great. ATDC, John?
Yeah, we take no equity position directly. Like I said, we do have an accelerator that's part of the program that is primarily from corporate sponsors that do take equity, but not the incubator itself.
Okay. And Caroline?
We don't take equity from the companies. The university does benefit through our partnership with the fund, and that's where the fund shares 1/2 the carry with campus. So we don't take any equity, but so we virtually take 1/2 of that general partner equity. But as we are a university program, and our mission is to further UC Berkeley's public education mission, we do connect quite a bit for the value of both the startups and the university, the startups that come to our program who are not from the UC system. So we have very intentionally built ways to benefit our university through this, bringing in this talent from around the world. So we're very mindful of that.
Great, great. And Satish, I already see a theme of dancers here, but
Right. So we are all these programs are grant based, and there's grants that go to teams. So we don't take any equity for exchange for the grants. Any equity that goes to the universities is likely through the licenses through each individual university. For example, the Combine, I think, created something like 5 or 6 university licenses for New York City universities in 3 years. And so there was certainly equity efficiency taking there. There has been some discussion, just generally, should you know, if a grant is given sort of in a phase 2 to a graduating team to go into their company, should that be in exchange for some type of convertible note, just as a way to try and keep these programs sustainable when the funding dries up?
Yeah, yeah. Great. Well, thank you all so much for answering that. I want to back up just a little bit, going back again to, you know, kind of the generation of your programs, and maybe Carolyn and John, I can direct this one to you. When you were looking at establishing your accelerators and incubators, were there other programs that you looked at to help you decide, you know, how to actually form your programs? And then maybe talk about the specific issues you were trying to solve. I know you both already covered that somewhat, but were there other programs that you looked at that helped you, you know, establish what you decided was good for your ecosystem?
So I'll start. Yes, indeed. The university did look at various other ecosystems and how they managed it. I will say to that point to folks who are listening that if there doesn't seem to be one right way to do it, that's actually very true, but there is a right way for you to do it. And this panel reflects that universities all do it very differently, sometimes the same, but it really is dependent on what your individual ecosystem is, not only your university and what kind of programs you have, the number and types of various people in various disciplines, but also where you're located is critical. We're in the broader Silicon Valley, so we do things here that work in this particular area that might not work in a different area, and vice versa. So I think that's an important point about all what we're trying to do here. And in terms of problem solving, I think that we're all trying to solve really the same problems, which is to bring commercial discoveries at our universities to market in a way that benefits the university as much as possible, not just through technology licensing, but through capturing some of the value that is created by startups that emanate from those discoveries. And also, the other big problem we're solving is we have excited entrepreneurs on campus and excited faculty and alumni who are all looking to launch startups or become entrepreneurs, and they would love that to happen in the context of their university. So that's very much what we're aiming to do, is give that opportunity to our students and faculty and community.
I think that's very well said, actually. And it's also true here at ATDC that a lot of the companies that come through our program are taking IP from the university as their core technology. So that is a benefit back to the university that's not directly in equity, but certainly is value to the university. And in general, you know, the quest we're all on, the thing we're trying to do is help these startup companies find economic sustainability, right, to provide more value in the world than they're taking. And that applies to us as an organization as well, to find our own models for how to become economically sustainable to keep this program moving. And I think that requires that we also be innovative in the way that works. And I don't think it's a static answer. I think it needs to change over time and by location, as was just said.
Thank you, John. So another question from our audience that I was actually going to ask each of you as well is, how do you actually measure success, and are there metrics or statistics that you're using for that measurement? Reed, I'll start out with you.
Yeah, it's very early for us, so we're taking a very long-term view, and time will tell. We're very pleased with the quality of the companies that are approaching us, and the amount of support we're getting from other investors and other members of the ecosystem locally. We've got 10 different labs that have industry access programs that have joined the network with us to make it easier for startups to discover this highly specialized equipment and access it. All of the universities, we've gone to visit various labs and the licensing offices and kind of explain what we're actually doing behind the scenes, and we're getting a tremendous amount of support. As investors in the financial model, our fund has up to an 18-year life, whereas most venture firms have up to a 10-year fund life. So that's so that we can invest into things literally like nuclear fusion power plants or stem cell engineering, things that have a long technology roadmap and a long time to market. So time will tell. We're pretty convinced that, hey, if we can help this company become the first commercial nuclear fusion power plant, that's a pretty good business. So we expect to hit financial returns as well as have a positive impact on the world. But it's a long game.
Great, thanks. Satish, how are you measuring success for your programs?
Yeah, so I think ours, you know, by being more early stage, there are only certain things I think we measure at the outset. So we like to see certainly, you know, number of companies formed from the teams. Teams that typically go through our programs are pre-company launch. They're first-time founders, and so they're coming to the program and figuring out what it means to identify product market fit, do customer discovery, whether as PhD students, for example, do they want to become founders of a company in the first place, kind of get that validation from the market. And so number of those individuals that turn into companies is a great stat to follow. Following that, as the program matures, those teams are out there, capital raised of any kind, grant or private, is also a number that we track. And then I guess the third, I mean, there's others, but I think the third would be just personally, we like to know, I try to keep track of how many licenses we are achieved between the universities and these teams, because I think it's the measure, another measure of how we're potentially helping the research get out of the lab.
Those are great measurements. John, for ATDC, I mean, you've obviously have quite a long track record. How have you been measuring success, and has that changed over time, and what are your current measurements?
Well, today, I think our primary goal is to create robust entrepreneurs that can be successful with their companies. So one of the things we track is the longevity and success of the companies that come through our that graduate from our program. So we track them 5 years out and determine the number of them that are still, you know, healthy and operating after 5 years of leaving the program is one metric. We also track, even though we don't take direct equity, of course, we track the successful launching of the companies that come through the program, how much they raise and how much they return, and also the IP that comes out of the university and how much of that is monetized by the startup eventually. And you're right, those are long range goals, five-year plus type numbers before they, you know, start to show up in general.
Mm-hmm. And Caroline, are there specific metrics that you're trying to achieve as well?
Sure. So because Berkeley Skydeck has this public-private partnership with the Berkeley Skydeck Fund, we measure our progress in both quantitative metrics that any venture capital fund would use, and so that's number of exits, amount raised by the companies in total, which is over 800 million at this point, number of companies that get received term sheets and funding after demo day, and then fund metrics such as markups on the valuations, et cetera. So we do look at that because obviously the returns to the campus will emanate from those metrics and acquisitions and all of that good quantitative data. But we also, equally important, measure qualitative metrics on how much value we provide to UC Berkeley and our educational mission here. So how many students and faculty engage with our program? What's the benefit to them? Are we helping educate our students and faculty and our alum about being entrepreneurs? Are we providing value for them? Value to our alumni who come back to mentor and want to mentor students and other entrepreneurs. So both of those metrics, those types of metrics, are equally important for us.
Great. I think that's really important for people to hear about how each of you are defining success, perhaps how you're being measured by, you know, outside sources as well, to, you know, help keep your ventures going, but also to see how potentially things can shift over time as well. So I appreciate all those answers. Another question that I was going to ask that the audience also is interested in is about how, when you're actually engaging with a spinoff that has worked with taking a license perhaps from the University Tech Transfer Office or Commercialization Office, how are you working with those offices? Is it obviously, you know, Satish, you're actually located obviously in the same place, but the others of you who are more separated, how are you working with your technology transfer office? And Caroline, let's go backwards. Let's start with you this time and work our way.
Sure. So very closely, many of the company, a good number, I would say, of the companies that come through here are licensing technology that they have developed in a university, in our labs here. And so often those companies need a lot of hand-holding and help as they both launch a company and license IP and figure out all of that. So it's a very close partnership. Actually, they're in our building a few floors down, and we're all on speed dial. And that's been a very important relationship because, as we all know, it's not a check the box and fill out this form and voila, you have a technology license. And UC Berkeley engages with people like you at Osage to try to make these things happen. So it's a very close partnership. It's not a formal partnership, but it's an informal one that is very important to the success of our companies that are licensing or seeking to license IP from UC Berkeley.
And Reed, this is something that's obviously newer for MIT with the engine. How has the connections been happening with the Technology Transfer Office, particularly again with the policies around intellectual property that's created at the university and things moving into the engine as part of their next step?
Right. It's actually been very enlightening for me personally to work with the different offices and different institutions around here. Leslie Miller-Nicholson, who runs the MIT's Technology Licensing Office, when the engine was first getting up and running, spent a bunch of time with us to ask, are there points of friction for these very small companies that she could tweak MIT's policies. So she made a few small changes which are useful when companies are only raising a little bit of money, and making you can either license something or get an option on it, making the options be renewable, allowing you to negotiate payment terms even for certain legal work that had been done at the request of the person who had optioned something. That used to be a lump sum net 30 days. As soon as you execute a license, you owe it. That's now more flexible. So it's really been interesting to get to know the teams. We go maybe quarterly to their staff meetings, MIT and Harvard, and kind of give an update on what the engine is doing and how the companies are doing. We don't get involved directly in negotiations. That's kind of between the startup and the office. But it's a very collaborative relationship.
Great.
So this is Satish. I thought I'd jump in there. In addition to running our own accelerator programs, I think our office does a lot of work in marketing existing startups and sort of startup-ready technologies to other accelerators and investors. And so I guess a question maybe to Reed and Caroline is are you engaging the Tech Transfer Office to source companies?
Oh yeah, indeed. We do. They often bring to our attention, and vice versa, entrepreneurs or pre-entrepreneurs, I would say, on campus, so that the campus is aware of how Skydeck can help at these early stages, and that we're aware of folks on campus who might be thinking about commercializing. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, same here. We have they make a lot of introductions. Each of the universities in Boston is slightly different. Some of them are very sort of business development focused, where the licensing officer might actually come to the first pitch meeting and help tell the story. Others are more kind of a resource driven, but they'll say, hey, engine, we know you're interested in this zone. Do you want to meet this PI and take a look at what they're working on? So obviously the engine, we don't have any special access, so we have to compete with all the other investors if something is particularly interesting.
John, did you want to mention anything about how you work with your Tech Transfer Office?
Sure. We've got actually a separate group under the same umbrella called Venture Lab, which is designed to work specifically with faculty and students who are developing ideas that might be commercializable. So when they get engaged, they may not even be thinking about commercialization, but this group can help them take a look at what they're working on and figure out if it makes sense to move down that path. In some cases, those professors and students end up getting directly involved with that, or sometimes they just make it available so that the transfer office can work with entrepreneurs to license it into a startup company. And in many cases, whether that comes directly from the students or whether that's from an outside place, they land at ATDC for that incubation period. But I think having that separate group to focus on that aspect is necessary, because a lot of times that IP that's being developed is not initially being thought of as commercializable, at least in any near-term way. So a group of people who are focused on that helps a lot.
Moving on to another topic, we've got a number of questions on the venture funds associated with your programs. For those of you who have funds, so particularly obviously Engine and Skydeck, could you give the background about the LPs in the funds, and also is there a target rate of return for the funds, and any other specific about the funds that are associated with your programs?
Sure, I'll start. The fund, as I mentioned, the Berkeley Skydeck Fund, it's all private venture capital. So the LPs are primarily institutional investors, VCs like Sequoia, Mayfield, Sierra Ventures, Canvas Ventures. So much of the fund is traditional Silicon Valley VC firms. There are also some firms, both LPs, VCs and strategics from Asia. That's a good portion of our fund. There's a lot of interest in what we do from Asian investors. And the fund has the ambitions of any seed fund, as high a return as possible, so that the fund can then grow and launch multiple funds. And then, of course, from the university perspective, those returns come back to campus and help fund our educational programs. But we are very happy to find that when we started fundraising, we went directly to institutional investors, and they were very interested in this as a business opportunity. So we didn't even end up needing to pursue grants or pursue UC Berkeley alumni who just would like to support what we do. That's, of course, a fantastic way to fund programs. I'm not saying it's not, but we were happy to get that feedback from the venture community that Berkeley Skydeck is a very good investment opportunity.
This is Reed. On our side, it was interesting. The bulk of the investors in the fund are families, and we set our time, the fund life, 18 years, especially long, to sort of align, make sure that the investors in the fund recognized the type of project that we were going to look for. And families, and there's one endowment involved as well. The families and endowments tend to have a very long-term view, multi-generational view. So that helped make sure that the Caroline, just like you, we're not looking for concessionary returns, even though we want to have a positive impact on the world. So it's our job to make money for our investors over the long term. That's the only way that the engine will be able to thrive long term. But it's like raising any venture fund, just making sure your investors are aligned with your strategy.
Right. And they're, of course, hoping for a certain type of return on that investment, which is probably aligned with typical venture investments.
Yeah, and then with the engine, it's because of the length of time, we really have to look for things that could be transformational. So not saying that all of our investments will be that, but if we can find things that could change an industry or change the world, that's the scale of things we're looking for.
Right.
So that might be actually a little something different at the Engage program at ATDC, or it's a separate program, but we're in the same space. Is actually the fund that's funded by corporations. So all the members of the fund are, large corporations rather than private angels or private equity. So between, Georgia Power and AT&T, Chick-fil-A, Delta, there's, I think, 10 companies in that fund that are investing in these startups. It's a for-profit traditional accelerator, but all the funding there comes from corporate venture.
Mm. Oh, great. Thanks, John. Actually, just sticking with you, John, for a minute, one of the questions we have about incubators is what are the key resources then you provide beyond the lab and the office space? And I know you and I had talked a bit about mentors and advisors, but what are the other resources that ATDC provides?
We have a series of connectors, we call them. They're people that are specifically adding capabilities to the startup related to talent, for example. So we have a Campus Connect, which helps the startups identify specific talent for whatever they need, for whatever their startups are doing, from the university or from wherever we can get around Atlanta, but they just help them with that. We have an Investor Connect, which is specifically connecting them with money, VC resources from wherever it can be made available. And from the science perspective, being at Georgia Tech, of course, we have access to all the various labs and technologies and IP that's available at Georgia Tech to help them move forward as well. On another dimension, we've got verticals that we provide specific attention around that help us bring a center of gravity around that vertical in Atlanta. So we have a fintech area and a retail tech. So when we have these kind of vertical focus areas, it draws more expertise, subject matter experts and events in the Atlanta area that these startups can then connect with.
Great. I think that, you know, that's certainly one of the things, obviously, that new entrepreneurs, new people starting companies can take so much away from are obviously these networks and connections that the incubators and accelerators can provide. Reed, Caroline, and Satish, are there any comments that you have on different ways that you're trying to provide those connections through your programs as well?
You know, this is Reed again. The part of our, when I mentioned platform services that we're building, we are actually building our own specialized networks, one around an industry liaison program for large corporations, and another around founders of local tech startups that are not software companies. So we find there's a lot of peer learning, and if we can create density of relationships and connections, every environment ecosystem is different, but in the Boston area, there's quite a few companies, you know, below the radar, if you will, that have built substantial businesses off of scientific breakthroughs, and trying to bring those companies together so the founders learn from each other and the operators learn from each other is definitely part of, we have people working intentionally on that.
So in terms of programming that supports our goals, you know, as I mentioned, we are an educational institution and part of that. So one of the things that we're very focused on is providing benefit to the entire UC Berkeley community. So there's much that can be done to just simply connect the people who are either at Berkeley or connected to Berkeley who want to launch a startup, become an entrepreneur, advise entrepreneurs, and invest in startups. And so we're working to connect all of those various people, because that, you know, with 500,000 living UC Berkeley alumni, plus, you know, 50,000 people or so on around campus, that's a big job. So we're really trying to build that network of Berkeley and Berkeley affiliates that are connected to or interested in supporting startups in some way, shape, or form.
And this is Satish. I think for our programs, the three here, considering the stage that are at, and also a lot of these you know, companies are looking to do enterprise type offerings, with requires sort of a unique kind of understanding of how to vertically integrate into those industries. And so what we try to do is support in the team building. So we're trying to match CEOs perhaps that have that expertise from the industry side that would make that team investable. And we try to also introduce these teams to the corporations that will actually be the eventual buyers of the products being developed. We've seen that when we do that, we get great mentorship, we get potential pilot studies with companies, and we're fortunate to be in New York, where, you know, several of the industries have headquarters here in the city. And so for a startup to be able to go through a program, in addition to get the sort of the experience of sort of being out there, they get matched with a potential CEO, they get matched with a company that could be a potential pilot, and they get thrown into sort of a network of investors. I think that's a lot of the that's the majority of the support that we can give. I think what's coming next, probably as the next generation of these, would be access to lab facilities and things like that. But for us, the programs have to grow a bit before we can do that. I'll say for the IBM blockchain specifically is a little bit different, just because since we are launching that with the strategic, we do have access to their engineers. And so in that program, as an example, the actual lab resource would be the IBM engineers themselves that will help the startups design MVPs around blockchain and things like that.
So that's really important. I think area that you bring up there, Satish, which is this pulling in outside groups to help collaborate with these programs and the relationships that you have. For any of the rest of you, are there any really special relationships that you have with outside entities, including other venture investors that, you know, not that they get a, maybe they get a first look, or that they have certain advisory roles within within your program, or companies, kind of as Satish was just mentioning, with IBM, special relationships that you have with companies or investors associated with your programs. And whoever, Caroline, if you want to start out.
Sure. So our special relationships are the folks that we partner with to fund the program, keep the lights on and pay the bills here. We couldn't do what we do without them. And those folks are all up on our website. There's about 40 of them. Companies that they make a donation to UC Berkeley. That donation comes to Skydeck and helps fund the program. And we really love how that program works, because it not only helps us to run the program, but these companies bring resources, they bring knowledge, expertise, enthusiasm, investment, and all good things for the startups. So they help not just fund the program, but help bring a lot of value to our startups. All those folks are on our website, and we love to talk about them, and we love it when they engage with our program.
John, are there any particular special relationships with the companies or investors that you have?
The interesting thing about Atlanta is the concentration of corporate innovation centers that are spun up here now, and it's creating a sort of critical mass where we're having pretty good success with a paid pilot model. So rather than equity investments from a venture capital side of a corporate, we're actually getting paid, proof of concept development from the corporate to the startup. And that's interesting because it leads to a lot more ways to imagine commercialization occurring, and a more direct, revenue sort of a model for the startups. And I mean, that's a trend that's relatively new. I don't think it has a long enough history to know how well that'll go, but really exciting to see that trend occurring.
Great. Another question that we have from the audience is about how you monitor the health of the companies that are associated with your programs. Are you having regular meetings with them? How does that work? And how do you intervene if you see a company floundering? Reed, can we start with you?
Sure. We, although we're investors, we are relatively, I don't know what the right, we try to be very empathetic with the founders and have them realize that we have founder empathy. We've been there ourselves, and we want to help them. Helping them sometimes means challenging them or calling them out on stuff. But part of the reason we have a big workspace is if it makes sense for the companies to work in the same office here with us, it really helps us. At the beginning, when we make an investment, we typically invest anywhere from on the order of $1 million to $4 million as a first check. We usually have weekly meetings with the founding team for the first few months, and then we're often on the board of directors or an observer on the board. So we have plenty of moments to check in and help out. The best for us is when they just pop in. So they're like, hey, I'm just got off a call with a customer, and can you help me think through what they really meant? Or I'm about to make an offer, I'm trying to choose between these two people. Can I pick your brain for a few seconds? So it's a collaborative side-by-side relationship. If we can get the founders to kind of drop their shields and let us in behind their defenses, then we feel we can really be helpful. My business partner, Katie Ray, and I have worked together for 14 years. And we've done our own startups. We ran Techstars, Accelerator program in Boston for years. We've done maybe 100 investments in the last 8 years locally. So we kind of feel like founders first. We're here to help them survive and then help them thrive. But yeah, we absolutely try to help out.
John, since you've been doing this a long time, and obviously ATTC as well, how do you step in? How do you know the startups are floundering, and what do you do to step in?
Yeah, I really like the previous answer. I don't think there's any substitute for coming alongside previously successful founders who've been through the same pain that you have, and talking about what it really takes. It's our experience here that the founders aren't lacking in motivation in general. There's plenty of that energy. It's more about channeling and understanding the right ways to use that energy. So having someone who's been successful in the past come alongside and help out We also have a CEO circle where the founders get together and talk amongst themselves about where they're really having pain points, which has been very successful. So there's nothing like experience, I think, to help pull them through.
Right.
I just wanted that on that CEO circle comment. This is Satish from Columbia. We started doing that with the Combine in terms of we did our first sort of retreat. It was in the city, but we basically convened the alumni from the past that still had companies up and running and were pursuing from the last 3 cohorts, and had them get together and had sort of a session that sounds similar, and it was fascinating. It was really such a great therapeutic session in some ways for the companies to see each other again and understand what the other one was doing and how they share common challenges and common pains of being a founder. And we were able to bring in some investors and some other entrepreneurs to give advice and speak. And it was a really nice day. I wonder if that's something that can be done more often with our accelerators, but we really like that. Found it to be very helpful for founders.
So I'll speak to that as well. The most important thing to actually being able to help a floundering company is you have to win their trust so that they will open up to you. And even working alongside them day by day, that's, of course, that helps a great deal because we work in the same workspace. But if they don't trust you, they won't tell you what's going on. And so I think the fact that myself and the fund manager were both startup founders ourselves, we both had our failures and our exits, gives us some credibility when we talk to founders here, and that was intentional. And having us in these positions, having us be startup founders and not academics. And then in terms of what do you do with them when they're floundering, we have a huge number of both formal and informal ways to monitor their progress. So everything from, there's an acceleration method that we have, the Berkeley acceleration method that goes throughout the 6 months they're there, and it includes formal meetings, a practice board meeting, it includes weekly meetings, it includes a connection with a set of key advisors that are matched with the startups at the beginning of the program, and many more things that happen throughout the program that lead up to our formal demo day. And that's just Berkeley Skydeck. The Berkeley Skydeck Fund also has full-time staff that work with the companies and win their trust and focus on things that are more specific to fundraising and investor relationships. So it's really hard to accelerate, to take a company and get it from point A to point B, where point B is much further along in a number of months. So it really requires a lot of trust and a lot of understanding of what the startups are going through, both from an emotional point of view, because it's very hard to do a startup, as we all know, but also from a technical point of view, a scientific point of view for what they're working on, and a knowledge of what's the process, how do you fundraise, how do you get from having a great idea or a prototype to being investable by seed investors. So it's definitely not an easy process, but I would say it's the most rewarding thing about what we do here at Skydeck is helping these young companies overcome obstacles and thrive.
Thank you all so much for your answer to all these questions. We do still have a few questions from the audience. I'd love to give you 2 more questions, but have really quick responses from each one of you on each of these. One is, to what extent can startups in your accelerator use university resources and facilities? Caroline.
So because we are a university program, we focus on that a great deal. Or actually, our tech transfer office has developed a pilot program to do exactly that, to connect startups in our programs here to lab and resources on campus so that there is a nice, clean use of the facilities. The university is compensated, and the startups can retain that IP. We have a very creative person in our tech transfer office, Mike Cohen, who has been developing these programs. In addition, there are many other labs and resources on campus that we help our startups access, and because we're a university program and because the startups, if they succeed, the university benefits, we're able to facilitate quite a bit of that. As we all know, there isn't a menu on the website that you go to and click here for the fabrication lab access. It really does require developing the relationships on campus required to enable those access to resources.
Reed, any facilities, resources on campus and issues or ways that's working for Tangent?
Yeah, we definitely are investing in that. We have a program we call the Engine Room, where we find labs that have existing industry access programs, and the Engine signs a master access agreement and then tries to make the facility manager's life easier by where we run dispatch and help with discovery and explaining the policies. I think we're working with about 10 labs now. And then on the flip side, we actually, like MIT is a nonprofit, they have to charge market rates for access to facilities, right? So it turns out that Harvard, some of their labs, same situation, their rate card has industry rate, non-Harvard academic rate, startup rate, and then Harvard rate. So MIT, we walk back across town and say, hey, did you know that there is a market rate across town for startups that's different than for industry, corporates? So we're trying to be a matchmaker and sort of take some friction out of both the lab manager side and the startup side.
Great. So I'm going to ask the last question quickly. I know we're a little bit over time, but this question has been asked a couple of times now, and it's about whether you've had any difficulties regarding property taxes when a nonprofit is hosting a rent-paying commercial enterprise. This is kind of a really practical question. Has that been an issue for any of you, particularly Caroline? Obviously, Berkeley, you're located associated with the campus, although slightly off campus.
No, but we do look at all of those issues frequently, because those are very important as a public university, that we're mindful and following all the important rules and regulations about that.
Okay. Satish, John, or Reed, any comments on the tax implications there?
It's simple for us because we're an arm's length for-profit.
Yes.
Yeah, in some ways it's simple for us too, because we are virtual programs with no physical space, and we're giving grants to teams or labs that are non-diluted, that are just grants.
Right.
So.
And John, how have you worked with this issue?
Yeah, those leases and agreements and all have been in place for a long time, so it's something that we've already worked out the details for.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, and I thank you. I apologize for those members of our audience who we didn't get to your questions. We do have them noted, and we'll follow up with our panelists on those particular questions. We are now out of time. We would love to wrap up and collect actually our audience's feedback on our webinar. So you'll notice a link to a feedback survey in your chat box. We will also be sending this out by email to those of you who have registered for this. But if you could fill this out, we'd really appreciate it. We do base our future webinar topics and any changes to our webinars based on this feedback. And then lastly, of course, I'd really like to thank our panelists for joining us today. Thank you, Caroline, Satish, Reed, and John, for being our panelists in today's discussion. Their email addresses are on the screen, so if you have any follow-up questions for any of them, please do feel to reach out to them. They've agreed to take questions from the people who attended today's webinar. So thank you, everyone, for your participation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh.